So because of the formatting of Redonkulous Race, I had to go about writing this a bit differently than the other Total Drama seasons. I'm not going to be giving each team their placements each episode unless it's a noteworthy one, at least not until like the final 7, because before that point, doing so would be way too complicated and just kind of unnecessary. I will also admit that writing character interactions and having things flow naturally was considerably more difficult in a race setting, because while I do have alliances and conflicts and such, there may be times during this video where they feel very inconsistent, simply because I'm not really sure how to implement them into the race. Honestly, revisiting this season, I forgot just how entertaining and well put together it was, and trying to make my own version really put into perspective how good of a job they did here. This is in stark contrast to Pocket 2 and All-Stars, which were not only much worse quality-wise, but were also much easier to expand and improve upon in my own versions, as I think both my All-Stars and Pocket 2 rewrites are some of my best work to date. As for this one, I do like how it turned out, but I feel like some of the charm from the original was just really difficult to recapture. I guess when there's not nearly as many obvious blunders to improve upon, it's just a lot harder to write. That being said, I'm still excited to go into this one since it's been a long time coming, but before we go through the actual episodes, I'm going to explain how the randomized cast timeline changes a few things here. First of all, the McClanes are still on the back foot and Dawn is still a host. I'm going to be doing something a bit different with the cast of Redonkulous Race. Unlike in the other randomized cast videos, I kept the teams mostly the same as in the original, with a few exceptions. I decided that in order to spice things up a bit, I would take one team from each generation in the timeline I've created with the series. For my OG cast, I have Beth and Lindsay, whose dynamic at this point would be friends who have rekindled over the past few years, but are still kinda on different wavelengths and have to get used to following along with each other. Lindsay and Caleb would still be together, and because it's been 8 years since season 1, they'd both be in their mid-20s and are about to get engaged. Beth had always kind of felt left behind and has mostly just been working on her farm, but ever since season 1, she feels like she hasn't had a big win since then, which makes her feel pretty insecure being paired with Lindsay. And her being less conventionally attractive doesn't help either. Then for my revenge cast, I have Tom and Aiden, with Tom completing his police training and Aiden in school to become a therapist. They aren't in financial ruin by any means, but the prize money would definitely help with their future goals. But they're mostly just in it for fun. Then for Pocket 2, I have the two main antagonists, Scott and Courtney. These two would have an on and off relationship for the past 2 years, constantly arguing about who dumped who and who knows best. Originally, it was mainly just Courtney bullying Scott into submission, but at this point, he usually just tunes her out whenever she irritates him, which tends to be most of the time. Oh, and because Noah isn't a merger, he's replaced by Izzy here. So she and Owen are mostly just absurdist comic relief. But there's still one new team left to discuss, and that's Trevor and Derek. In this timeline, they never would have committed environmental terrorism because of everything that went down last season with the McClanes. And Trevor would be able to convince Derek to try to climb the ladder by the books in order to become future hosts of this series. And that avenue happens to manifest in them competing this season. Trevor still always has to keep his eye on Derek to stop him from doing something stupid or shady though, as he's always looking for shortcuts. For the record, the police cadets are also competing still, and Dawn is hosting solo. Mostly. You may be wondering why Blanley and Mr. Coconut are in the hosting section, and I will get to that later. Now, with all that out of the way, let's get into the actual episodes. All the dynamics I just mentioned would be shown during the first 2 episodes, with the stairs and the zipline and the spices and all that. I don't think any of the new teams would struggle too much with any of the steps. Maybe Scott and Courtney would argue about who eats the spices, but Courtney has an iron stomach, so she should be able to get through it. And because Leonard isn't a merger, he and Tammy wouldn't exist, meaning that sadly, the father and son duo are eliminated, as besides the LARPers, they were the last to arrive. Again, besides the dynamics I already laid out, nothing much changes here. The tennis rivals and Owen are still held back longer than anyone else, and since Owen and Noah avoided elimination originally, I see no reason why Izzy wouldn't get them across the finish line just as fast, if not even faster, by just slingshotting them or something. So tennis rivals get booted. The only thing worth noting about this episode is that Trevor would find the Surfer Bros spirits being destroyed and rebuilt this episode really endearing and adorable, and tries to nudge Derek in the same direction, which ultimately leads Derek to believe Trevor is suggesting an alliance with the Surfers, saying it's a great idea, and goes for it before Trevor can correct him. The Surfer Bros are hesitant at first with how early it is in the game, but Derek would tell them it's mutually beneficial since they can carry each other far, which will get Derek to his goal of hosting. And then he can use his hosting powers to cast the Surfer Bros as much as they want. And since the Surfer Bros are really just in it for the fun, they would love the idea of having potentially limitless invites to competitions, so they're in. Anyway, the geniuses still overthink their sandcastles and take way longer than anyone else, meaning that they're eliminated here like in the original. Now, because there are 4 more teams than in the original, most non-elimination rounds will now become elimination rounds, as frankly there were way too many of those in the original, and keeping up with them here would be incredibly complicated, so it's better to stick to this instead. Scott and Courtney and Beth and Lindsay would struggle at memorizing the foreign sentence, but they'd both eventually be able to do it before the last team. And because the father and son team aren't here to accidentally steal the vegans' frozen fossil, they never resort to eating the meat, meaning they finish in 8th place where they would have placed in the original. And now the Rockers, who were second to last originally, are eliminated instead. The episodes in blue are the bonus non-elimination episodes where Blanley steps in. After the twins have their alliance with the sisters cut short, Scott and Courtney witness their crash, and Scott gets the idea to ally with them to use them as human shields. Courtney thinks it's a terrible idea, but Scott convinces her by telling her with a bigger team they won't have to deal with each other as much, so Courtney is in, and the Adversity twins are desperate enough to accept anything at this point, even though Jay has a bad feeling about them. So the reason Blanley is a host is because in order to balance out the new number of teams, every 6 episodes is a non-elimination, and instead of last place getting eliminated, first place gets a prize, which in this case are the ice dancers. Their prize is that they get to skip any challenge section of their choosing later down the line. However, last place also gets a punishment, which wouldn't be the vegans anymore since they no longer get the penalty now that Lori's spirit wouldn't be crushed, so she'd fully participate in the challenge. However, second to last place was the Rockers, who also aren't here anymore, and the next last place this episode were the police cadets, but right before them were Owen and Noah. But since now it's Owen and Izzy, she would fly them way off the finish line on the hang glider, so the police cadets get 16th and Owen and Izzy get last, so they have to spin a wheel next episode after they cross the finish line, determining how long their penalty will be. The only real change here is that Noah doesn't develop a crush on Emma since he isn't here. Other than that, the fashion bloggers still get last after being penalized. Owen and Izzy's penalty would get them pretty close to last, but because this is a Hotel Transylvania episode and I imagine Izzy would do really well in horror settings, I think they would still beat out these guys. By this point, Kitty would be able to pick up on the fact that Trevor is into Derek, and on top of that, Carrie being into Devin, still saying that her love alarm has been going off a lot lately. And she tells Trevor that he and Carrie actually have a lot in common, that maybe they should work together since they're going through virtually the same thing. Emma asks Kitty why she's talking to their rivals, and Kitty tells her it's called being nice, and besides, it could help them in the long run. Jose still loses her lucky rabbit's foot, but now Tom and Aiden find it by accident, and Aiden tells Tom to keep it for good luck, and Jose takes the lava rock instead, beginning their curse. Originally, the daters came in last, but Scott and Courtney would see them fight and have realizations like, damn, is that really what we sound like? And when Ryan apologizes to Scott for all their bickering, Scott tells him not to sweat it, and that he actually finds hatred to be a surprisingly motivating force. Ryan asks him if he's serious, and Scott tells him yeah, that's how he's gotten this far. So Ryan insults Stephanie even more, which makes her insult him even more, motivating him to run faster on the hot coals and throw Stephanie onto the finish line, and they still break up. So because the motivation got the hater daters to cross the finish line faster, last place now goes to the mother-daughter duo instead, and Kelly still comes clean about all of Taylor's fake awards. Carrie would approach Trevor asking him if he likes Derek, and he panics not wanting to confront the question. Carrie calms him down saying she knows exactly how she feels, and that maybe they should work together. Derek says the more the merrier, and Devin says it's a good idea since Shelley would also think it's a good idea. After the Adversity twins finish tennis first, Scott pulls them aside and tells them it's time for them to start pulling their weight around here and help them do the tennis. Jay points out that they haven't done anything for them yet, and Scott tells them they will in due time, but they need to get through tennis for them first. But because the Adversity twins are so weak, and them completing the challenge the first time around was definitely a fluke, they end up missing literally every single tennis ball, and Scott would make the mistake of relying on them to not miss, so he gets shot off the building by the machine. Lindsay and Beth would go shopping, but Beth would suddenly remember that they have to finish the race before they get last place. But by the time they get there, it's too late. Or at least it would be if Scott and Courtney weren't medevaced after Scott got injured. Because this isn't the Final Four, I don't think that they get to bring a team back either. Ryan and Stephanie see what happened to them and figure hate probably isn't a great motivator after all, but they still don't like each other. So they both have to cooperate, as they both say to each other with hesitance and disgust. Beth now gets super intense knowing they almost just lost because of shopping, and tells Lindsay that from now on, they need to do things her way in order to stay in the race. Even though she won't admit it, her taking control is partly due to her own insecurity, but this episode gives her a really good excuse to do so anyway. Owen is still the squeegee for the sisters, but because Noah isn't here with them, there's no alliance, but it does at least give Kitty an excuse to tell Emma warming up to others ain't so bad. It's also worth noting that because of the good luck charm, Tom and Aiden finish first and say, "I can't stop winning!" Carrie and Devin try telling their partners their true feelings, but keep getting interrupted by the parachuting, the scorpion eating challenge, etc. Ryan and Stephanie begrudgingly cooperate, but they place much slower this time, without as strong of a motivation. So like from first to maybe 6th or 7th, I guess. Tom and Aiden get first once again though, and with the ice dancers cucked out of the podium once again, Jose starts to notice how good Tom and Aiden are doing. Too good. Beth would take charge this episode and land her and Lindsay in the top 3 somehow, which MacArthur takes note of and says she's genuinely impressed, and she and Beth become unlikely friends. Owen and Izzy would also probably get a really high placement right after the ice dancers, and when Jose screams in frustration at her good luck charm not working, Izzy would tell them it's cursed, which she would know because she used to run a small cult in Hawaii, which often involved spiritually blessed or cursed items. And upon hearing this, the ice dancers are sent into a panic. Now, originally, the last team to cross the finish line was the Rockers, who are no longer here, and right before them was the father and son team, who also aren't here. So the best friends, who are right before them, since they lagged behind after Carrie couldn't stomach the food, are the next ones on the chopping block. Well, they would be, except that there's one team here that would do even worse than them. The vegans. While it is true the vegans ate meat in the original, that was after they got desperate during a 2-path challenge, and the vegan-friendly one didn't work. Whereas now, they are not only immediately forced to get through this challenge in order to win, but they also have to watch everyone around them scarf it up too, including Carrie, who gets sick from it. So while they might eventually give in and eat it for the sake of the race, it won't be nearly fast enough to avoid last place. So the vegans are eliminated. Because the best friends were extremely close to losing, plus the fact that Trevor has been motivating her to do so, Carrie tells Devin her true feelings. But because Shelley hasn't broken up with him yet, Devin friend-zones her, which leads Carrie straight to where she was in the original when she accepted Devin doesn't like him. Dejected and kinda bitter. Carrie tells Trevor to give up and that sharing your true feelings does nothing but cause pain and disappointment. This depresses Trevor and makes him want to hang out with the surfer dudes to lift his spirits, so he puts most of his stake in them and barely even acknowledges Derek at this point. The ice dancers book a trip back to Hawaii to get rid of the curse, which would mean that they're royally fucked since this is an elimination episode now, and they originally got last, but luckily for them, they have the reward they earned in episode 6, which allows them to skip an entire challenge section. And considering they almost didn't get last place in the original after doing all that, with an entire challenge skipped over, they should easily be able to avoid last place now, albeit with a still pretty low placement. Kitty would notice how love is very much not in the air anymore between the best friends, Derek and Trevor, and the dater-haters barely tolerating each other, setting a very drab atmosphere around them. She tries talking to Carrie and Trevor, but is just met with anger and sadness, respectively. Aside from that, nothing really changes all that much. In fact, the elimination stays the same, albeit playing out slightly different. In the original, the bottom 2 was Owen and Noah versus the Adversity Twins for air guitar. And while Emma wouldn't sabotage them now since she's not covering for Noah, it wouldn't matter since now Izzy would be doing air guitar and I think she'd finish first with Owen, even beating out Tom and Aiden's good luck streak, which still leaves the Adversity Twins in last. Beth would still be really angry and assertive, so she'd do fine, and while Trevor probably isn't great at air guitar, we've seen him be energetic enough and also doing weird dances before, so that's still gotta be better than the Adversity Twins whose bones would crack after a light breeze. Blaney and Mr. Coconut return for another reward challenge. This time, the prize for the winning team is that they can give any team they want immunity at any point in the game, except for themselves. And the last place team is locked in an even harder to escape jail cell during the next episode. There's not much that really happens in this episode that didn't in the original, other than the ice dancers running Tom and Aiden off the road as vengeance for stealing their good luck charm. Aiden shouts, "What's your problem?" at them, and they drive off, and Tom comes in with the good luck charm in his hand and says, "Gee, I wonder what their problem was." Police cadets still get first, and as for who gets last, the team still here in the original with the lowest placement is actually the Goths in 8th place. Well, besides the ice dancers, but, you know, they're not cursed anymore and already did the whole Hawaii thing. And we never really see the Goths struggle, like, at all in this challenge. It was more than likely just a default placement. So that leads me to believe that Derek and Trevor will get last place here, meaning they get punished next episode. Blaney doesn't leave just yet, though, as this episode is the halfway mark in the season. And because of the new structure of the episode, one team actually returns here, and in this universe it would be decided by the fans. Yes, I mean the real-life fans. For those of you who don't know, way back in 2007, when the finale of Island premiered, fans could actually vote who they wanted to win between Gwen or Owen. And I wanted to do something similar here where I bring back the team I retroactively believe would be chosen by real fans of the show when it was airing. Which in this timeline, I think would be the fashion bloggers. Not only did they end on a really positive high note, but they were also fan favorites who most people agree deserved more screen time. And while there are other like teams like the Rockers or Father and Son, they both got eliminated way too early to make as much of an impression for my version. So I think the fashion bloggers are both the best and most realistic option. As for the challenge, originally the cadets get last after their intense beef with the ice dancers does them in this episode. But the thing is, the surfer dudes won the immunity prize last challenge, which I think Brody would want to use to save MacArthur since he likes her. And Jeff would obviously support that decision, so even though this is an elimination round, They live to see another day. Question is, who's taking their place? Well, the team that was here in the original that was right before them were the Ice Dancers. But the thing is, with the Cadets and Ice Dancers both locked up, I think Trevor and Derek would be locked in there with them automatically because of their punishment from last episode. And they're obviously not beating the Ice Dancers, so they would lose, and Derek would throw a fit after realizing the Surfer Dudes accidentally screwed them over. Derek leaves angry, and Trevor thanks the Surfer Dudes for being cool since he knows they didn't do that on purpose, and just wonders where he and Derek go from here. The last thing Trevor says before leaving is, "I just wish I had another chance. Make of that what you will." Shelley would now have broken up with Devin, but I'm choosing to skip over the 5 stages of grief after Devin witnesses how Trevor and Derek went out, and Carrie would tell Devin about everything regarding working with them, and to honor their memory, Carrie and Devin express their true feelings to each other and begin dating. Unfortunately for them, they also lose alongside the stepbrothers in a tie for the bottom 2 this episode. The reason being that the only teams that didn't beat them that also didn't get eliminated were the Surfer Bros and Police Cadets. But the reason they lagged behind was because the Ice Dancers tricked them into hunting a fake albino bunny. But Jose would now deploy that trick on Tom and Aiden instead, which distracts them, but Tom's detective skills figure it out fast enough to avoid last place, which then gets them to wonder whose scheme that was in the first place. So with the Cadets and Surfers finishing faster, and the fashion bloggers taking their sweet time making their bunnies look stylish but still avoid the bottom 2, the best friends are eliminated along with the stepbrothers as they were in canon, but at least they both leave happy. Once Tom and Aiden figure out it was the Ice Dancers that tricked them last episode, they team up with the Police Cadets, who also hate them to take the Ice Dancers out. And because Beth has been slipping a bit lately, she would also want in because she'd think that this is the boost she needs. Meanwhile, Lindsay is just really unsure and uncomfortable with everything, but starts to self-reflect after Beth tells her it's exactly the kind of move she would do, realizing she's the one who led Beth down this path all the way back to since like season 1. Doesn't stop the Ice Dancers from winning by a huge margin though. As far as who's eliminated, I think Izzy would continuously screw up the dance to the point where everyone else passes them and she and Owen get last. Now with these 3 teams in an alliance, MacArthur, Tom, and Beth all scarf down the beans and beat the Mechanical Bull, with all of them finishing in the top 4, right after the Surfer Dudes. After they all win, the Police Cadets and Tom and Aiden go hang out, but when Beth asks Lindsay if she's coming, she says she'd rather be alone. Beth asks her why, and Lindsay tells her she feels like Beth isn't her friend anymore and has gotten way too competitive. Beth frustratedly yells she thought Lindsay wanted a fierce competitor by her side, and she tells her no, actually she just wanted to do this race with her friend. But Beth retorts back saying if that were the case and she didn't want such a fierce competitor and just wanted her friend back, then why did she shun her all those years for Caleb and total drama, and even just in life after that? Beth feels like she thought she was just competing for herself at first, but at some point she had to admit to herself a big part of this is really just to appease Lindsay. And that clearly didn't work, so what's even the point? Beth storms off and leaves Lindsay speechless. Kitty tries to comfort her after seeing this. But before all that, with the big alliance working together to give the Ice Dancers a taste of their own medicine, they screw with the Mechanical Bull when Jacques is on it, slowing them down even more. And since they were the 3rd to last team to cross in the original, only before Owen and Noah and the father and son duo, neither of whom are here anymore, they now get eliminated. You could argue the fashion bloggers wouldn't be great at this challenge, but I think Tom and Jen got that dog in them enough to not get last. Emma tries to use the conflict between Beth and Lindsay to split them off from the Mega Alliance and into their own corner instead. Kitty doesn't like the idea of taking advantage of others' distress, but Emma insists the time for playing nice is starting to fade this deep into the competition, especially since the teams Kitty tried bonding with aren't here anymore. And also because if the Mega Alliance of 3 teams were able to get rid of the Ice Dancers, who knows what else they could do with that much manpower. It's just a risk they have to take, because their odds significantly worsen if that alliance doesn't fracture soon. Kitty agrees, but only as long as she can legitimately help Lindsay and Beth settle their differences, in addition to using Emma's strategy of getting them to turn on the alliance. And both sisters agree it's mutually beneficial. The Ice Dancers aren't here to manipulate the Surfer Dudes anymore, so they're just chillin', and Tom's coordination would be really good and get the ring on the Norwal pretty fast. While Jen has designer leather coats handy for them to wear, making it easier for them to endure the cold. Also, I think the Dater haters get eliminated here, since they got last in the original, only now it's an elimination round, as Stephanie boomeranged Ryan out of spite, and I think that would still happen since them trying to cooperate could only have lasted so long with how much they hate each other. So I don't really see them making it past this episode. Basically, the tension from them trying not to lash out at each other would make them sabotage each other this episode. Beth is now fully sold on Emma's telling her to defect, since now that they're down to 7 teams, Beth would want a smaller alliance with someone that thinks more like her. And Kitty tells Lindsay to go along with it, and it'll help reconnect her with her friend if they all stick together anyway. The Police Cadets still get stuck on the tree surrounded by Komodo dragons, But after Sanders admits she never returned to pay for her fries, Tom swoops in and saves them after Aiden lures them away, leaving Sanders to wonder what MacArthur was about to admit before they got saved. Originally, the Goths won, but after the fashion bloggers get the venom from the bucket of drool they left, they would be able to find their rugs faster and get first since they're fashion experts. This allows them a reward, and this time it's an all-paid trip to the most upscaled mall in New York after the race. This doesn't affect the race in any way, it's just a free prize they get whether they win the competition or not. Brody would also try saving MacArthur again and fail miserably, but he still traps the Komodo dragon in the taxi for everyone. But they end up getting last because the Goths, fashion bloggers, sisters, and Beth and Lindsay already finished before them. And the surfers are too nice not to let the police cadets win, which also means Tom and Aiden beat them since they're essentially a double pair. Once it's announced that it's a non-elimination round, Jeff and Brody realize they need to lock in if they want to stay in the game, but have absolutely no idea what strategy or putting themselves before their friends even means as they try to spell it out for themselves. So this episode is the either-or between the buggy racing or magic trick with a lion, and I'm pretty sure the only teams that choose the magic trick are the Goths, since they did originally, and the fashion bloggers choose that because they get to show off the magician and assistant's outfits. The Goths, of course, still clear with Ennui taking Loki out of the lion's mouth, who, by the way, has still been with them this whole time. However, Tom would be freaked out by what the Goths just pulled, and now the lion is even angrier and hungrier than before. Jen would be freaking out because she's stuck with the lion, and that added stress on top of the fact that Tom hates how long and off-brand the top hat looks on him, wouldn't be able to clear the challenge until Jen forces him to swap places with her. MacArthur and Kitty were fighting in the original in the watchtower during the race, and now that they have more of a reason to fight since by this point MacArthur would figure out that the sisters and Beth and Lindsay split off from her and Sanders, as evidenced by Emma telling Kitty to swerve around Tom and blocking his vision with dust clouds, since she wouldn't want to hit him with the car since that would make it too obvious. Nonetheless, the police cadets use their detective skills to find out what's going on, and Sanders gives MacArthur the thumbs up to get revenge on the sisters, which just ends with both of them knocking their cars into each other, while Beth and Aiden try to get them off each other. Now, this is the point in the race where it makes sense to start going over each team's individual placements. And so, the Goths still get first. The surfers still get distracted by the buggy race, so they lag behind like in the original, but they'd want to bail once the whole feud breaks out since it'd be way more intense this time and it would kill the vibe. So they progress a bit faster and now get third. Beth and Lindsay get second, and Tom and Aiden get fourth, after Tom's clumsiness makes them drag a bit behind, but still not by much. Eventually, it comes down to whether the police cadets and sisters can put their differences aside faster than the fashion bloggers can complete the magic trick. And that's actually pretty hard to say, because the magic trick seems to be a lot faster in this episode, but considering the best friends originally got last after struggling with both challenges, and the fashion bloggers are just as, if not more disoriented here than they were, I think they would get last in a super tight race to the finish, with the cadets in 5th and the sisters in 6th. The fashion bloggers exit happy they got to experience this race and lasted this long, and squeal in excitement for the shopping spree award they won last episode. Because the ice dancers aren't here to steal Loki to throw the Goths off their game, and everyone else is either not cunning enough or way too distracted by other teams to do anything like that, the Goths finish first easily, since the Pepper does basically nothing to Crimson and they already have Loki, so they just win. The sisters and police cadets don't sabotage each other this time, instead their competition fuels them to get 2nd and 3rd place respectively. MacArthur's frustrated that they lost to the sisters, but Sanders tells her it's better to give them a false sense of security so they can retake the lead when it really counts. And MacArthur likes that idea once it's pointed out. I think by this point, Beth would see what being overly competitive did to Emma and MacArthur, which would remind her of why she was here with Lindsay in the first place. And she fully goes back to being friends first with Lindsay after she ate the hottest pepper for her, making her realize how selfish she was being. They have a heart-to-heart where Beth apologizes for trying to copy Lindsay's competitive edge too much, and Lindsay forgives her since she knows she was like that in the earlier seasons, and they've gotten this far largely because of Beth. So they can both confidently say they're proud of each other and hug. Tom would be a better jumper and swimmer than Aiden, leaving Aiden to eat the pepper, which would not go well at all since I imagine his tolerance is really low, and they would be lagging pretty far behind. Luckily for them, there is one team who does even worse than them, the Surfers. They both ate burritos on the bus, which completely destroyed their immune systems, and they crossed the finish line way after everyone else besides the Goths, who again get first now that Loki was never stolen, meaning the Surfers are eliminated. But like in the original, they go out happy, besides the stomach aches. So I'm actually going to be skipping this episode entirely, not only because there's only 5 teams left and we really don't need another reward challenge this late into the season, but also because this episode was meant to be a 3v3 with 2 super teams. Kinda doesn't work with only 5 teams, so yeah, I think it makes sense to just skip over this one. MacArthur slams their boat into the sisters and they keep retaliating back and forth, causing them both to crash. Tom feels guilty about not helping MacArthur, but every time he's tried, it just slows them down. And Aiden tells him it's time to accept it's better to let them and the sisters wear each other out, so they can get into the final three. Funny enough, the sisters and the cadets, who were the only ones still here originally, were both the last teams in this challenge. I see no reason why that would change, since instead of the ice dancers sabotaging both of them, they would just do it to each other now. I think the Goths take it pretty slow on the boats and the descent into the cave, so they actually get third this time. Behind Lindsay and Beth in first, and Tom and Aiden in second. Thing is, even though Sanders would get a lead on the sisters like she said, it would be quickly reversed after MacArthur does the same thing as in the original, where she drops Sanders to the cave ground and injures her arm out of desperation, ending with them getting last, only this time it is an elimination round. MacArthur still feels really guilty and promises that from now on she'll listen to her partner more. And since Emma and Kitty still see this happen in real time, it makes them reconsider how intense they were, and as Kitty says, they won, but at what cost? From now on, they play fair. This episode starts with filling up weave baskets and leaves in the scorching sun, followed by a train ride to the finish. Because the sisters just promised to play fair, and I imagine everyone else would too, it's really just a no-nonsense race to the finish here. And because of that, I think Tom and Aiden and the Goths finish first and second respectively. Beth and Lindsay and the sisters aren't nearly as competitive as they were before, due to how each of their arcs played out up to this point. And with them focusing on their alliance over the competition, they wouldn't be able to go nearly as fast as Tom and Aiden or the Goths, who would just be moving faster, get further up the train, and endure the heat better. So between the sisters and Beth and Lindsay, it literally comes down to a foot race off the train since nobody cuts the brakes off the carts, and I think Emma and Kitty would win by a slim margin, meaning Beth and Lindsay are eliminated. Both of them are happy getting fourth place and say even though they've known each other for so long, this race helped reunite them and let them get to know each other better than before. This episode works a bit differently than in the original. Before, this episode was a race which first had a tango and then an emu ride to the finish. This time though, Blanley and Mr. Coconut steps in for the final time this season, and they eliminate the race aspect from this episode entirely. Instead, this episode has the same deal as the second-to-last Pakatu Island episode, with 3 challenges, the first 2 being what was originally in this episode, only now they're individual challenges. The other big change is that the last challenge is to find Mr. Coconut, who is hidden somewhere. Keep in mind, the scoring system works the same way it did in Packed with Talent, so the first place team gets 3 points, second place gets 2 points, and third place gets 1 point. At the end of all 3 challenges, whichever team has the lowest score is cut from the race. First is the tango, in which I think Tom and Aiden get first, the Goths get second, and the sisters get third. Tom and Aiden have a ton of chemistry, and even though Tom can be clumsy at times, I think Aiden would save him from tripping up, and their performance would be good. The sisters screwed it up in the original, so that still happens, and I don't think the Goths would fumble it, but there's obviously going to be zero passion in it, so it would be as plainly etiquette of a performance as you can get. Next is the emu catching, in which the Goths get first, the sisters get second, and Tom and Aiden get last. The ice dancers don't grease any emus, so there's not much to this one. The Goths are just naturally good at almost everything, and again, the sisters' emu isn't greased now, so it's much easier for them to catch. And since Tom can be pretty clumsy and Aiden can't help as much this time, I think the sisters beat them here. This leaves the score at Goths with 5, Tom and Aiden with 4, and the sisters with 3. And after a lot of searching, Kitty uses her experience looking in nooks and crannies for places to hide her phone in school to find Mr. Coconut stashed away in a tree, giving her and her sister a total of 6 points, leaving the Goths with 5, and finally, Tom and Aiden with the lowest score of 4, meaning they're eliminated. And they also have a good ending and wish the remaining 2 teams luck. The finale in this universe is the last 2 episodes combined in one straight race to the finish line in New York City, including the race underwater where Kitty still gets stuck, but Crimson's makeup starts to fade and clog her vision in the suit, giving both teams equal delays and therefore enough time to continue to NYC neck and neck. And from that point on, there's not really much I can add, honestly. It's pretty much the same thing, but with different teams, minus the surfers taking the subway. It's just a straight shot to the finish between the taxis, giant flight of stairs, and boat number at the very end. And of course, each team gets an alternate ending. Coincidentally, I don't really have a preference since these are my 2 favorite teams in the season, and yes, believe it or not, that is genuinely a coincidence that they both made it to the finale. I honestly thought before finishing this that this wouldn't happen, but here we are. Anyway, I guess the sisters make more sense narratively as winners, but the Goths are equally deserving of it in my opinion, so take your pick I guess. And that's going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for 1,000 subscribers, and shout out to my Patreon list. Link to it is in the description, and so is my channel update video for those of you who haven't seen it yet. I'm really excited to keep this channel going and see where else it takes me. See you for the next video.